All right, so my name is Sanjay Kaushik, and I used to work with the US Embassy in the visa section. I worked there for about 15 years. I was managing the non-immigrant visas, then the immigrant, the anti-fraud, and then I became the visa specialist. And then for the past 22 years, I've been helping students across Southeast Asia, including India, uh, Thailand, Singapore, everything around this, or not only for F1 but also for the USMLEs. So I would give you a little presentation, and towards the end, like I said, we'll have an open house where you can ask questions. And I would recommend that be more interactive so that we all can benefit out of it. Uh, it would also be wonderful if you could leave your comments right in the end. And in case if you find that we need to improve on our presentation or we need to include more subjects in it, please let us know. We'll be more than happy to do that. So allow me to start my presentation. Like I said, this is more about the USMLEs. So we do understand that you would have possibly now understood that USMLE means the licensing exams which happens in America, the step 3, and there are step 1 and step 2 that you have to take. However, before you even embark on the journey of getting your eventual residency, you need to also apply for your visas, which is primarily anyone who's going for a rotation in the US would apply for a B1. You know, once the visa is approved, usually a person would get a B1, B2, multiple 10 years, unless the officer decides to give you a limited visa, which is rare, but it happens. So you do not have to apply for a B2 because B2 essentially means tourist. Now there's a difference between applying for a visa and once your visa gets approved. When you're entering the US, the immigration officer would also have questions depending on the purpose of your trip. Then he would select the visa category for you to enter. Even if you have a B1, B2, depending on the visa category or the purpose of your visit, he would stamp your passport accordingly. So there are two-step process. One is not only just getting your visa, but once you get your visa, when you enter the US, it should also be your appropriate visa category that he should allow you to go in. And that would be a B1 rather than a B2. Okay? So this is just the beginning that we've started off. Now, like I said in the beginning, that a B1 is a temporary business visitor. Anyone who's going there for a purpose, which could be a rotation, which could be a seminar, which could be any professional engagement, or meeting anyone, that's business. So that all when you're applying for a visa, when you're choosing your visa category, it has to be a B1 primarily, right? And though once you get your visa, you may get a B1, B2, but your visa that you select for the purpose should be a B1 because you're going in for a purpose, right? So what is the difference? Like I said, the non-immigrant visa, who's applying and going to the US on temporary basis for either a tourism or medical treatment or business is called a non-immigrant visa. Now, the non-immigrant visa means that you have to show your intention of returning back to your home country. Okay? Like I said earlier mentioned, there is one Department of State which issues the visa. Then it's at the port of entry. The visa officers would then look at your visa application form, and based on that, they would make the decision of issuing a B1. Similarly, when you reach the US, the immigration officer, the port of entry officer, will ask you certain questions, and depending on the purpose of your visit, he would stamp your passport with the appropriate visa category to enter the US. So once you enter the US, then your I-94, which is issued by the immigration officer at the port of entry, is the most important document. So one is your passport, which is important. Then once you apply for your visa, you get your visa. Your visa is important. Once you enter the US, then your I-94, the immigration officer that issues the I-94, which is digital, is also a very important document. So once you are traveling to the US, make sure you have all these sequences in place. Okay, so what is the visa process? Once you've decided that you want to go and do your rotations in America, then the first thing is you need to have a schedule in mind that if you're planning to travel to the US, let's say in October, November, so this would be a right time for you to start the process because currently the visa dates are not available freely. The first available date is for May or June of next year. However, if you keep looking for an appointment, there are cancellations. You may pick up an early appointment. That is also possible. However, step one is to fill your visa form called DS 160. So the DS means Department of State, right? So now when you fill the visa form, make sure that you're filling the visa form which is absolutely accurate. Mention all the information which is absolutely authentic, because once you submit your application, it stays in the system for 99 years. So when you're applying for your B1, B2, now you fill a DS 160. And once when you go and qualify for your residency and you match and you get your J1, your DS 2019, then you have to reapply for your visa and you have to refill a visa form, which is the same as DS 160. And the visa officers and the immigration officers would have access to your DS 160 all the time because it stays in the system for 99 years. So make sure all the information that goes in your first visa application form is absolutely correct. If inadvertently, if you made a mistake, you don't have to worry. You can go back and refill a new DS 160 and carry both. And during the interview, if the officer asks, you can show the new one, mentioning that you made a mistake on the last one. That's acceptable. So don't worry. However, it is very important that when you start filling your DS 160, make sure that all the information on that is absolutely correct. Once you complete your DS 160, in order to schedule your appointment, you have to create your profile. In that profile, you have to mention your name, your date of birth, your passport details, the DS 160 number. That's how it gets interconnected. And then the profile allows you to pay the visa application fees, which is 17,500, something of that sort, because the dollar rate keeps changing. So we can check that online and provide you that information. And once you do that, then it takes about 2-3 hours for the activation. Once the fees is activated, then you have to schedule 2 appointments. One for your fingerprint and other one is going to be for your counselor appointment. And then in support of your application, you have to carry all your documents and also prepare for your visa interview, which we'll talk during this conversation, right? So like I mentioned, you have to fill your visa form called DS 160, create your profile on the US visa travel docs, pay the visa application fees, and then schedule an appointment for yourself. The appointments, you have got to schedule 2 appointments. One is for your OFC, the biometrics, and the other one is going to be the counselor appointment, which is the visa interview. It has to be booked at one go. It's not that I can log in today, book a biometrics and log out and log in to check the counselor appointment. It doesn't work that way. You log in, the calendar shows the visa appointment. That's the first calendar. You book it, you choose the date. When you select next, then it shows you the counselor appointments. Again, the calendar will open up. You can choose a date and time, and once you submit, only then it gets confirmed. It's not that you can just book one and log out and come back again and do it. Right? So visa application fees, like I mentioned, it's $185. Because the dollar rate has changed, it has jumped from 15,540 now to close to about 17,000 rupees. There's also a system where you can also request for an emergency appointment. By first, you have to complete your process of filling your DS 160, creating a profile, paying the visa application fees, and scheduling an appointment. Let's say you get an appointment for May of 2026, but you have a rotation letter which starts in June of this year. Then you can send an emergency request to the embassy. It's up to the embassy to decide and either issue an emergency request or approve your emergency request or deny it, right? And in case if they approve it, the calendar, then you will have access to the calendar and then you can reschedule it to an early appointment. But usually you should do that very close to your travel dates. If you do make your emergency request 2 months or 1 month in advance, it may not get approved. So if you are traveling, let's say on 5th of June, so within 20 days, that would be the appropriate time for you to actually request for an emergency appointment. Now, whether it's approved, you'll get the calendar to reschedule it. If it gets denied, that only means that at that point of time when the visa officer was looking at your application or the request to give you a emergency approval, probably at that point of time, they did not have enough slots. That does not mean that your visa has been denied or it would adversely affect your visa application eventually. It does not mean that. It is just that the visa officers could not find a slot during that time that you're requested for. It does not have an adverse effect on your application at all. All right. Now, what documents you have to carry? because you're a professional, you are a student or a doctor, so carry those relevant documents which shows that either you're a student or that you've graduated and you're working, right? And then all your financial papers and your invitation letter, which is going to be a really important document because that sets the journey that you're going there for a purpose, right? So what are the financial papers? Well, it can come from your parents, your father, your mother, it can come from yourself as well. However, it is very important that you carry collective documents to not only show that you've got enough funds, but it also shows that you've got social ties with your parents, that your parents are willing to sponsor you. All right. So bank statements for the last 6 months, right? The amount, it is not necessary that you must maintain a certain amount to qualify for a visa. The officers are primarily looking at the transactions, right? And then it could be proof of investments from your parents, from yourself, which could include fixed deposits, shares, bonds, mutual funds, etc., which shows that you've got enough funds not only to support your travel, but also that you've made investments or your family has made investments, right? And also carrying property documents to show that your family is well established here in India, right? So who all can sponsor? Yourself, your parents, your grandparents. You can take a collective documents from all of them. Now, invitation letter from the hospital or the agency. If you've requested an agency, then the agency would give you a letter saying that you've been accepted and this is the schedule. And they would also mention the name of the hospital or the clinic where you're going in for your rotations. Or if you apply directly to a hospital, get a letter of invite which says that they have accepted you and your rotation is going to be in this particular field for this duration. Because that's the purpose that you're going in for. So make sure that you carry that document for sure, right? Now, when we talk about the visa interview, so any person who's applying for a non-immigrant visa, the visa law says that the person should be treated as a potential immigrant, that you'll go and settle in America. Whereas the officer wants to figure out why will you come back, right? So you need to understand the visa law, understand your situation, and based on your situation, you have to figure out the answers that you have to connect with each question the officer asks, right? So like I said, any interview or any conversation is subjective. What you say, what the officer could understand could be two different things, right? So whenever anyone who comes to me for consultation, we first tell them and ask them to listen to their own answers so that figure out whether the answer is making sense or not, right? Because what I say, I believe that what I'm saying is absolutely correct. But we need to also understand that what is being delivered and what is being captured by the other person, is it making sense to him or not, right? So be very clear in giving your answers, which tells about you, your background, what are you currently doing, what will you study in America, what is the rotation all about, and how will that help you? So we help, our consultation goes on one-on-one. We will sit down with each person, understand the situation, and then try and provide them those answers based on their own parameters and their own circumstances, right? However, when we talk about the visa law, the law is looking at three major things: your social ties, your financial ties, and most importantly, your professional goals. Because the whole purpose, the whole reason of you going to the US is to upgrade your technical skills, your professional skills for a better career growth. So you must know where your career is going from here and what will happen once you complete your residency and your fellowship in America. So there are two goals to achieve when you apply for a rotation visa. One is your short-term goals, and then of course your long-term goals. And then we help you build those answers, which not only talks about your short-term plans, but also your long-term plans. How do you qualify for an H1 from now itself for visa, right? So like I said, I'm sure the visa officer doesn't know you, and there are close to about 500, 600 people applying for visas every day. The visa officers would have only 2 or 3 minutes. In that 2 or 3 minutes, the officer has to understand your reason of going there and your reason of coming back, right? You have to provide this information voluntarily. The officer will not sit down and ask, why will you come back? What are your goals? He's trying to figure out from your answers that have you provided those informations or not. Okay? Now, if I ask you today, why do you want to go to the US? In this question, the officer wants to know that what have you studied here? Because he doesn't know you, right? You could be a a chemist, a physiotherapist, a doctor, a dentist, or a person who's done a computer science, so he doesn't know, right? So you have to start by giving him a little relevance of what you've done here, right? What are you currently doing? And how will this education help you in the future, right? You have to connect these things so that the officer is on the same page as you are, right? Okay. Then he may also ask you, why are you going to this particular institute or this particular college or this particular hospital, right? Here, the officer wants to figure out your intentions. So there are two kind of people going in for visas. One, those who want to go to the US, and one, those who want to go and study in the US for better career growth. So there's a difference, right? So he wants to figure out that, are you a legitimate traveler? Have you done your research? Have you looked at various other options? And why have you chosen this particular institute? You know, and choosing an institute should base on your decision, which should be relevant to your career. You know, whether it is nephrology, internal medicine, psychiatry, you must understand where the career is going, right? And how will that actually help you? That's why he wants to know this. Funding, how will you fund yourself, right? Here he wants to figure out the financial strength of the family. Not that you have enough money to cover your travel expense. He's not looking at that. He's looking at your family's annual income, their savings, investments, your properties, so that he can understand holistically that your family is financially stable in India, right? And then if he asks you, are you preparing for USMLEs? Most of the time, a student may go and say yes or no. If you say no, it's a disaster because your rotations does not have, in particular, value in India, because the officers are looking at probably 50, 60 USMLE aspirants in a day. And then he's also interviewing people who have qualified for a J1 and H1, those who went for the rotation. So he understands that if a doctor is going there for a rotation, his eventual goal is to qualify for a J1 or for an H1. However, how do you navigate the answer is very important by telling him that your focus is specialization, not just the USMLE. You're also preparing for the Indian PG and the USMLE and the particular department, so that you have the options open for you. Because in your career, the specialization would matter, right? So keep that in focus when answering these questions, right? Once the visa is approved, then it takes about 3 or 4 days for you to get your passport back. Usually you'll get a passport stamped by a B1, B2 with a multiple entry with a validity of 10 years. However, that 10-year multiple visa does not allow a person to go and stay there for 10 years. So each time when you're going in for your travel to the US, the immigration officer would look at your purpose of travel, like I said in the beginning, and then based on that, he would then stamp your arrival stamp, mentioning you coming here, entering on a B1. Let's say that person has a B1, B2, and he got about 3 years ago, and he first visited to visit a family member. So if you open up the passport, you'll see a stamp which says a B2 at the port of entry, that the person is coming here for tourism. However, now that you're traveling for your observership or for your rotation or for your step 3, he'll ask you the purpose and stamp a B1, which tells not only the immigration officer, but also the visa officer when you come in for your H1 or your J1 that you entered for a specific purpose, right? Your duration of stay. Usually, when you enter the US on a B1 or a B2, the immigration officer may grant you a 6 months validity to stay in the US. However, I would suggest and recommend that, students should not be staying there for a longer duration. A 3-month or a 4-month duration for rotations is good enough. Return back, spend about a month here, month and a half, then go back again for your another rotation. That would keep your records clean for your J1 and H1, because I've seen students going and staying there for 5 months, 6 months, and then coming back to India, staying here for 2-3 months, and then going back and staying there again for a longer duration, like 5 or 6 months. However, when they come in for their J1, the officer would have too many questions to ask. You have to prove too many things, that what were you doing there for 6 months? Where were you staying? How were you taking care of your expenses? Were you working illegally or not? There'll be too many questions, right? So I would suggest and recommend, try and, stay there for 4.5 months, return back, stay here, and then go back. That would make your transition much easier and simpler, right? Like I said, if you stay there for 6 months, Then in order to optimize it, the officer would have a lot of questions. They may ask you, why were you staying there for such a long duration? And then it may sometimes delay your J1 or your H1 issuance, right? So this is going to be the end of my presentation, and I would like to open up the floor so that we all can ask questions, and I would be more than happy to answer what you have to ask in case if you have any questions. Thank you. Yes, if you have any question, you may ask or type it down, and then we'll be more than happy to answer, like I said. No questions yet? Okay, so I believe that two things may have happened. One is, what are the charges of application filing? Okay, can I get the invitation through you? Yeah, so, Soham has asked a question about the visa application on basis of step 3. The step 3 basis, the process remains the same, Soham. You have to fill your DS 160. You need to first get your scheduling permit, and based on that, then, we can start your application by filling your DS 160, creating your profile, paying the visa application fees, and scheduling the appointment. Because step 3 only happens in America. So you can always put in during the visa interview that step 3 is an important and an integral part of the USMLE process, and the step 3 exams only happens in America, right? You could mention this. Well, Yash asked, if they ask you about the steps at the USMLE, what should we answer? Yes or no? Well, like I said, if anyone who's going in for a rotation, right? At the same time, in a day, the visa officer would have also interviewed a person who's going and applying for an H1. So he knows if somebody is going for a rotation, observership, or electives, would eventually like to go in for his USMLE exams and possibly, get an H1 or J1. So he knows that you know the steps, right? However, when you're giving an answer, you also have to tell him how would that help you back home. So it has to be a very collective answer, not just that, do you know the steps or not, Yash? Okay. So what is the difference between a J1 and an H1? Hassan says. So Hassan, the difference between a J1 and H1, primarily for a job perspective, it's the same. However, the J1 has a rider which says that anyone who's going on a J1 possibly have to come back to their home country and stay here for 2 years before they can go back on an immigrant visa or an H1 or apply for a waiver, right? H1 does not have any rider as such, right? However, when a student asks me this, that sir, I've got a J1 and an H1, which one should I opt for? Because J1 would have a rider saying that I need to come back or apply for a waiver. So my answer to that is it depends on the hospital that you have been given the contract from. If the J1 hospital is a better ranked hospital, right, then you should aim for a J1 because the specialty would stay with you, right? I've just got a pop-up saying that we've got another 10 minutes to go because the Zoom gives us a limited time frame, and in case if if it shuts down, please do message us or email us. We'll be more than happy to respond and get back to you on one-on-one. But until then, post your questions. I'll be more than happy to answer them. Shom says, yes, sir, I have a letter from FSMB for step 3. So any particular question the officer may interest know. Yeah, the officer would like to know why you're taking your F3, why you're taking your step 3, what are your eventual goals, right? Are you only preparing for USMLE? What is the specialization? What are you going to do once you complete your fellowship? Those are the kind of questions the officer might ask, right? Okay, so Yash says if we already have one refusal, what important things should we take into mind? Yash, I remember talking to you yesterday also. The first important thing is you have to be very, very clear in your mind that what is the purpose of your visit, right? Like I've mentioned during the presentation, that your answer should be a very complete answer, not just saying that I want to go to the US to do my electives. It makes no sense to the officer. You've got to give him a little context that I'm a doctor and I've been working here for X number of years, and I've seen how psychiatry or nephrology has progressed in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I'd like to go to the US to understand the international protocols so that I can use those once I return back to my home country. So giving a holistic approach, saying that going and coming back is really important. So first, be very clear what you want to do. Sure to articulate your answers, which gives them a little context, right? And then that context should matter to the officer. It should be interconnected, right? Like SG has said, is it safe to give long answers? Now it has to be relevant, right? The entire interview at the embassy is not going to be more than 2 minutes, right? In that 2 minutes, you have to provide that relevance. That is the whole purpose of our visa counseling, our consultation, our one-on-one mock sessions, where we tell you this is important, this is not, eliminate this, include this, so that your answer becomes relevant for the officer, right? It is just not that I need to give an answer. No, you have to give an answer which is relevant, which is appropriate, crisp, with context, right? So be very sure of what you want to go and study. How will that actually help you in your career? You have to incorporate those things in your answer. First is understand what's happening in India, right? You find a problem and you go with the problem, and in your answer, you show that problem and give an answer, give a solution to that. Everybody in the world likes a problem to be solved, right? If you can give that answer in a context, your process becomes easier, right? So take the officer along with you, keep him on the same page, have relevant answers, crisp, not long, not short, but practice them so that you understand it is making sense, not only for your career, but also according to the visa law, right? And I would really suggest and recommend everyone to please drop in a message talking about about the presentation, about the content that we've given you. And if you want us to include more content or eliminate content, it would be really helpful for us and for students those who will be attending our webinars in the future. And also I would really encourage all of you to please look at our Insta page, and because we keep posting a lot of relevant information, and which also a lot of students have benefited out of that. And if you like those content, please leave a thumbs up. It really gives me and my team a big boost to keep working what we're doing, right? Any other questions that we have? If not, then uh, we can say thank you and hope to see you soon. And feel free to so can you guide me for the J1 preparation and for things like statement of need, interview? Oh yes, we can do that for sure. You can get in touch with my team, and we'll be more than happy to assist you with the SON. We have a format for SON, and which has been successful and used by a lot of students. And yeah, sure, why not? My team will get in touch with you. And thank you very much for giving your time. And I hope this session really helped you out, and also help us by giving your comments and